Zare, come to Bathroom Bazaar.
Pulling the plug on high prices.
Good evening and a very warm welcome to the news at 10. My name is Lerato Mbele. Thank you so much for joining us. Now, earlier today, the opposition alliance in Nepal agreed to suspend pro-democracy protests. By the end of the day, the king had bowed to major demands. Now, observers say the Nepalese situation has similarities with the politics in Swaziland. Tonight, we see if there are any lessons to be learned in Africa from Nepal. But first, the headlines. Today, 6 people were killed in Benoni when they were thrown off a moving train. Security guards are believed to be responsible for the attack. 1 person has been arrested. All of the dead suffered multiple injuries. Apparently, the guards were targeting scab laborers. Police believe that the attackers were members of a union of security guards that are currently on strike for higher wages. Earlier this month, the union SACTRA launched a second wave of strikes. That's after the Labour Court overturned an earlier ruling declaring the strike illegal. SACTRA is demanding 11% in wage increases. A number of companies are trying to claim money from the estate of Brett Kebble. These include Rand Gold and Exploration, as well as JCI, of which he was the head. The mining mogul was killed in Johannesburg last year. Since then, his assets and estate have been frozen. Today, representatives of Rand Gold and Exploration were at the Cape High Court. They say Brett Kebble and the former company secretary, George Poole, defrauded them of 165 million rand. Both Kebble and Poole are alleged to have laundered the proceeds through various accounts that they controlled. The High Court has granted the company a provisional order for sequestration of the Kebble estate. And in North Africa, 10 people have been arrested after bomb attacks in Egypt. 3 explosions rocked the Red Sea resort of Dahab simultaneously. It's believed they were carried out by suicide bombers. It's the 3rd attack on the resorts of the Sinai Peninsula in an 18-month period. 18 people were killed and close to 100 were injured. The Egyptian president, Hosni Mubarak, says the perpetrators will be brought to book soon. Egypt has been a target of militant attacks from Islamic fundamentalist groups since the early 1990s. No one has claimed responsibility for last night's attacks. And tomorrow, Jacob Zuma is back in the Johannesburg High Court. His lawyers will be giving their closing arguments. The former deputy president is accused of raping a 31-year-old family friend in Johannesburg. But the trial has been embroiled in controversy after the court allowed the defense to probe the complainant's sexual history. The judge will only announce during his ruling if he has admitted all of this as evidence. The testimony of 2 police officers is also in question. They apparently failed to confirm the scene of the alleged rape. Meanwhile, the National Prosecuting Authority is not commenting on whether the complainant will remain on witness protection after the trial. The war of words between the Health Department and the Treatment Action Campaign continues. It started after the TAC rejected an invitation from the government to attend a special session on an AIDS conference in New York. The special session will be held at the end of May. Today, the TAC said its position on the matter has not changed. It says it will attend the gathering, but not as part of a government delegation. The government party will include 13 civil society organizations, the Health Department says. Its invitation, though, is not conditional. Sipho Mtati is the General Secretary of the Treatment Action Campaign. She joins us now from our Cape Town studios. Sipho, a warm welcome to the news at 10. Government has withdrawn its decision not to allow the Treatment Action Campaign to participate in a UN conference on AIDS. How do you, as the Treatment Action Campaign, regard this? Do you see it as an olive branch, or do you simply see government as having been compelled to make this kind of overture?
Well, the issue for us really is that we need more than olive branches. We need decisive leadership, and we need leadership that is going to respect our own country's processes that have been outlined and agreed as mechanisms through which the national AIDS response will be governed. We got the invitation. We raised constructively some of the issues we had with the manner in which the delegation was designed and put together. We did that in a friendly way, and we were therefore quite sad that the department took no notice of the principal questions that we were raising, including that you have a national, AIDS council where civil society groups sit, where it would have been possible for a better process which is more consultative, where civil society groups can feel they have had a voice in choosing their own representation, even as the representation is part of the country delegation.
What
And
about
those are
government's
issues-
concern, Sipho, that whenever government works on a consultative, collaborative forum with civil society organizations, you use international platforms to humiliate them instead of going out there as civil society concerned about the well-being of South Africa? You use international conferences to exploit the shortcomings of government's position and invariably to just vilify the state.
Well, we wish that in this case the government had done exactly that it had initiated as long as last year, because we've had more than plenty of time to undertake a consultative process. We wish the government could have done that, and that is exactly all that we have asked of the government to do. We wanted to go to Angus. We applied through the UN process. We have outlined in a letter that is very detailed to the government what we intend doing then, what we intend to say. But the government has continued to drive a process which we mostly feel has been unilateral and has taken no sense of what civil society groups feel in this matter. And it doesn't only start with this issue, it starts already with the report that the government designed and sent through to the UN despite civil society organizations' concerns, which people raised in a constructive manner to the government.
You've outlined to government your position and what you intend to put forward as debating points. Can you put those points forward to this nation?
Well, the tone of the Angus meeting is, for the past 25 years, we've tried to address the global epidemic. The world now agrees that the only way to move forward is to ensure that there is universal access to prevention care and treatment services. It's going to take massive resources to make that work by 2010. We can't aim for less than universal access to treatment. And we are therefore saying that global leaders have to put the resources to the table. They have to say, this is what we're putting to the table in order to ensure that the commitments we made last year at the General Assembly meeting are met. There is a global human resource crisis. There is no way that countries, particularly developing countries, can provide sustainable access to care and treatment without those human resources in healthcare systems. So those are some of the issues we're putting forward at the meeting.
Government has devoted over R1 billion South African rand to a comprehensive program on treatment prevention and invariably universal access, although the minister does insist that people should only go on ARVs once medically their CD4 count has dropped, and a doctor confirms that. So there isn't really a conflict of interest in that sense. Essentially, it seems as though what the state wants, what the TAC wants, is a healthier South African nation, is to reduce those levels of infection from 25%, is to reduce the figure from 6 million South Africans living with AIDS and HIV. But when it comes to deliberating on the solutions, there's no consensus. The politics overrule it. Why is that?
Lerato, there is absolute consensus on the comprehensive plan and the urgency that is needed in implementing it. We totally agree with the contents of the comprehensive plan. We totally acknowledge that the more than 100,000 to 200,000 lives saved through the comprehensive plan already, is not something to be scoffed at. However, our country continues to live with a crisis of illness and death. More than 800,000 people have AIDS and need AIDS treatment today. We've got to go at a much faster pace than we currently going. And those are some of the issues where we are urging government to act with greater agency and to use all the resources, including the TAC, to say we want to make this plan work. Get out there and do the work, and people are already out there doing the work. However, what we need is much more boldness, much more agency and targets. And that is exactly what we're asking government to do. If you look at the national country report that went to the UN meeting, there's no targets. And one of the key lines is South Africa is not concerned about numbers. But for us, the issue is not numbers. For us, the issue is that each of the lives that we allow because of the lack of agency in the way that we're handling the epidemic is people's lives, and that's what we're saying.
Thank you very much, Sipho Mtati, putting a human face to AIDS and HIV in this country. Thanks for your inputs. The General Secretary of the Treatment Action Campaign, speaking to us from Cape Town. Good luck with all that you're going to be doing in New York. After the break, our attention shifts to Nepal. Stay tuned. And welcome back. You're watching the news at 10. Only on SABC3. Maoist rebels in Nepal have rejected the king's offer to reinstate parliament. They say this is a ploy to save what they call his autocratic monarchy. Yesterday, King Gyanendra capitulated to a major demand to scrap the constitutional monarchy. This followed weeks of bloody riots in the tiny Asian state. The Nepalese Opposition Alliance then called off its pro-democracy protests, but the Maoist rebels urged people to continue. Meanwhile, a new interim government is expected to declare a ceasefire with the Maoists. The rebels have fought a 10-year insurgency against the government. The veteran politician Prasad Koirala is now poised to become the next Prime Minister of Nepal. Kiru Naidu is a specialist on Asia-Pacific issues. We usually have him on the show to unpack for us some of the dynamics of politics in that region, and he joins us now from our Durban studios. I thank you, Kiru, for coming through to the news at 10. Opposition groups in Nepal say they've brought the king to his knees. Now, besides the Velvet Revolution, the protests and the riots, exactly what are the circumstances that have led Nepal to this point?
Well, the genesis of this problem goes back some time, perhaps down to about 1959, because what we have in Nepal is one of the few remaining absolute monarchies in the world. And this has been a veritable people's power movement, where the coalition of political parties, along with the rebels, have been demanding that the king step down and restore a constitution to the country and have multi-party elections. Now, of course, the interests of the political parties in some ways are divergent with those of the Maoist rebels, but essentially it's been a case of people being fed up with the excesses of the king, who since 2002 has assumed executive powers, having suspended parliament. In 2005, he fired the prime minister.
Now, you have an autocratic king on the one side. You've got an opposition alliance made up of 7 parties that want constitutional reform and parliamentary democracy. And then you've got Maoist rebels. Who are the strongest political forces in Nepal?
Well, essentially what the king succeeded in doing is splitting the opposition. Because right now, the parties have agreed with the king's position that parliament will be convened on Friday. The Maoists have come out to say, well, they're not entirely happy with that, and what the parties have done is essentially go back on an agreement that was struck in November last year, in which the demand would be for the king to step down. I mean, presently the king is very much in power, and I think that until things change more drastically, the king is by far the most powerful personality. Even though we've had 20 days of protests on the streets of Kathmandu, he's still the one who's effectively in charge, and by the announcements that he made on television last night, he's the one that's called the parliament together, essentially created room for Koirala to assume the position of Prime Minister as of Friday this week.
Now, many observers looking at the events in Kathmandu have drawn parallels between that situation and what's happening in neighboring Swaziland. Again, that triangular structure of an autocratic king, traditionalists, but who also form part of a pro-democracy structure, and then you have trade unionists who are overtly for constitutional reform. Are there any lessons to be learned?
Well, we can't stretch the analogy too far, but yes, in essence, there are all kinds of parallels that one could draw, and the main one is to do with the fact that the days of absolute monarchies seem to be numbered. Now, we have had in Nepal a case where the king suspended the constitution, fired the prime minister sometime in the early 1960s. In Swaziland, we had King Sobhuza in the early 70s suspend the constitution and rule as an absolute monarch. And I think we've seen a kind of groundswell of opposition to absolute rule growing in Swaziland. So I don't think that the parallels are too far-fetched, but essentially there are vast differences between a country like Swaziland and what we have in the tiny Asian state of Nepal.
What we've seen from media reports is essentially a velvet revolution, people coming up and saying, we've had enough of this and we'll do whatever it takes. But then you also say the king essentially is still the person in power who has the ultimate say and absolute control. How does that bode for political stability in a country like Nepal? And essentially, if indeed in Swaziland there was to be a velvet revolution, with so much power vested in the king, what are the prospects for total reform?
Well, in Nepal, even though the king is under enormous pressure, he still sits on the throne. I think it's a very tenuous situation. I would be hardly surprised if he had to leave the presidential palace hurriedly overnight in a helicopter and go into exile, because that's the kind of scenario that the Maoist rebels have painted. It's a little different in Swaziland in that you don't have as organized a civil society as the Nepalese have been able to put together over the last 40 years or so. There's a very active media, even though it's been very heavily censored, but there's a diversity of political parties. They're backed by an armed insurrection in the form of the Maoist rebels. All of these things make it very different with Swaziland. I think as Swaziland develops its union movement, develops its political parties, we will see King Mswati come under tremendous pressure. And I think from the region also, the other nations in the region need not necessarily be as silent as they have been, because we have really a mounting crisis in Swaziland as we speak.
Thanks so much for your inputs, Kiru Naidu. Thanks for drawing comparisons between Nepal and Swaziland and for giving us your time. Kiru Naidu, a specialist on Asia-Pacific issues, but very specific in his analysis. Your business news follows after the break.
Good evening. European shares held onto a small advance by midday today. Updates from companies such as Renault and Volvo helped offset weaker mining stocks. Mixed quarterly results from retailer Tesco also dampened the tone. BP fell 0.4% to 708.5 pence. Britain's supermarket chain Tesco dropped 1.4%. Renault is up to 90.6 euros. TomTom, Europe's car navigation equipment maker, jumped 6.6%. And Infineon Technologies gained 2.4%. U.S. stocks fell today. This follows reports on strong consumer confidence and home sales data, which raised inflation concerns. Shares of utilities led the sell-off. Consumer confidence rose to the highest level in 4 years. Telephone giant AT&T rose 1 cent to $25.54. Automotive fuel cell maker Ballard Power Systems slumped to $10.79. Netflix gained $1.03. Lucent Technologies is down 4%, and drug maker Sabc3 lost $1.69. Let's take a look at how the markets performed today. The rand is weaker against major currencies. Local and offshore demand prevented the local unit from capitalizing on a stronger euro and higher gold price. The JSE ended slightly weaker, dragged down by widespread profit-taking. Anglo-American and Richmond were under pressure offshore. This further weighed on the local bursts. Gold's at $630.25 a fine ounce. Platinum is at $1,132.50 an ounce. And the spot price of Brent crude is $73.26 a barrel. The number of women serving on boards of South African companies stands at 11.5%. The 2006 South African Women in Corporate Leadership Census shows that there's been a decline from last year. The report says while the number of women in leadership positions continues to grow, the momentum is waning. Tina Thompson is the Chief Executive Officer of the Businesswomen's Association South Africa, and she's here with us in the studio. Thanks for coming and welcome.
Thank you very much.
What would you say are the key findings of the 2006 census?
I think, as you've mentioned, that there was a slight increase, in fact 0.8% in women directorships. However, I think the distressing part of this year's census was that the executive management percentage has dropped. It's dropped by 3% from 19.8% to 16.8%.
Why is that? Why would you say, what are the reasons for that drop?
There's several reasons, and obviously we haven't done the research, but we have a very good feeling of why this is the case. Mainly because those women are not actually retaining their posts. They're being placed and they're not able to sustain those positions. Several factors for that. First and foremost, I personally believe that the corporate place is not designed for women. They don't have adequate support systems in their homes. And of course, the age-old question of lack of confidence. That undoes most women.
Just picking up on the whole point of, you know, that the corporate environment hasn't changed. I mean, maybe that is never going to change. I mean, maybe the issue is about women asserting themselves and, you know, really pushing much harder than they have been. And I'm not suggesting that, you know, the prevailing environment and the sort of hostile reception is correct, that it should be maintained. But women should push harder, don't you think?
I think they really should. There's absolutely no reason. You know, we're as experienced and as qualified as the men are. I think it's a genetic default where we believe that it's not feminine to assert oneself. Over and above that, you know, resilience techniques need to be learned. Women are resilient in their private lives. They need to be resilient in the workplace and not take things as personally as they do.
Because, I mean, women have established a track record where you've got women who are doing extremely well in the corporate environment. And, you know, the issue then also becomes, what do those women do that have made it to the top? Are they supportive to other women? Are you finding that sometimes we are our worst enemy?
Often is the case, unfortunately, and women need to help other women. Those that have reached the top need to reach down and draw up the others alongside with them. That is our only hope. Those that have made it and do have the recipe need to show others how to do it.
But we've also seen quite a proliferation of charters with requirements for companies to do better as far as employment equity scores are concerned. Don't you think that legislative requirement is going to also provide further impetus to bring about significant women participation in the corporate
Yes, look, theoretically it should, but I think until it's enforced, it won't. There need to be incentives for actually implementing those charters, and there need to be penalties for those companies that are not doing so.
And if you look at, say, the public sector versus the private sector, I mean, in your census, it shows that the public sector the score has declined. Is that because a lot of the women who are doing well in the public sector have now moved to the private sector? What is the reason, would you say?
I think a lot of headhunting is going on, which is not correct. Those women are actually suffering. Companies that are offering other women, you know, incentives, and it's only money, to move, are actually committing a sin, because those women end up in therapy.
Well, thank you very much for your contribution and the outcomes of that survey. That was Tina Thompson, CEO of the Business Women's Association. News at 10 continues after the break. From me, good night.
And welcome back. The English soccer giants Manchester United are on their way to South Africa. The Red Devils will play Orlando Pirates and Kaizer Chiefs in July. The visit was confirmed at the 2006 launch of the Vodacom Challenge Cup in Johannesburg today. Soccer authorities say the games will help South Africa pick up on a few tips. This is geared at the preparations for the 2010 Soccer World Cup. Man United's first match will be against the Buccaneers themselves in Durban. Then they'll meet Amakhosi at Newlands on the 18th of July. 2 days later, Chiefs will play Pirates in Rustenburg. The winner of that match will play United in the finals at Loftus Stadium on July 22nd. And now, JC Engelbrecht has your weather.
It's good evening. Time to have a look at your weather for Wednesday. Clear skies returning to the central and the southern parts of the country. A little bit of cloud expected along the northern border. Some fog patches expected tomorrow morning. That will clear by noon. that's along that eastern escarpment. Cloudy conditions as we move into KZN. Having a look at the temperatures for tonight, well, clear skies, maximum radiation and cool weather expected over the central interior. Kimberley dropping to 4, 8 for Pretoria. Durban, mild night, 16 degrees, PE dropping to 9. Mild in Cape Town, 15. Uppington dropping to 8. And a cold night in Sutherland, -5, reaching a high of 20 tomorrow. 27 up in Uppington, Cape Town, a high of 26. And staying cool onto the eastern high ground. Johannesburg, 20, 25 up in Messina, and mid-20s into KZN, Durban, 26 as a high. That's all from me. Have a great evening. Cheers.
Thanks a lot, JC. That's all from the News at 10 team for this Tuesday. We'll be back with you tomorrow. Thank you so much for joining us from the 10 o'clock team and the crew. Good night.